Lesson 8, Evolution versus Intelligent Design. I want to begin with the reference material. I've already mentioned signature in the cell, which I hope you looked at that video, especially the aspect of the sequencing of amino acids to make protein and the probability of that happening. Now, also by Stephen Meyer, I'd like to present you to a segment of Darwin's Doubt. And additional information, if you would like to read The Cambrian Explosion, Biology's Big Bang by Stephen Meyer and Ross and Nelson and Chen, this is the link for that as well. It goes into a little more detail for you. And now I want to get into, this is a presentation on Darwin's Doubt, which I've provided for you here. There's other ones that have segments of his book on the internet, but I thought this one was very good. This is a presentation that he gives. He speaks rather quickly. I wish they would leave some of the PowerPoints up a little longer, but you can always pause it if you need to. He touches on the explanation of deficits of neo-Darwinianism, the origin of the phenotypic complexity and the origin of anatomical novelty, origin of non-gradual modes of transition, the abrupt fossil appearance, which I want to touch on some as far as the Cambrian explosion, and then the gene regulatory networks. Very good presentation, and I hope you get to have an opportunity to see that. So I know that many of you are not aware of the Cambrian explosion or the Cambrian radiation. So this is from an excerpt from the Wikipedia on the subject. Now this was an event at approximately 541 million years ago in the Cambrianic period, when most major animal phyla appeared in the fossil record. It lasted for about 13 to 25 million years and resulted in the divergence of most modern metazoa phyla. The event was accompanied by major diversification of other organisms. Before the Cambrian explosion, most organisms were simple, composed of individual cells occasionally organized into colonies. As the rate of diversification significantly accelerated, the variety of life began to resemble that of today. Almost all present animal phyla appeared during this period. So I'd like to begin this discussion with Charles Darwin's Origin of the Species, 1859, and the famous quote that most of you have perhaps heard: "If it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. But I can find no such case." Now, in regards to the Cambrian explosion, the period gets its name from Cambria, the Roman name for Wales, where Adam Sedgwick was one of the pioneers of geology, studied rock strata. Charles Darwin was one of his students. However, Sedgwick never accepted Darwin's theory of evolution and natural selection. Now, if you look to the chart to the left, you will see that between the years 4 billion years ago up to 543 million years ago, everything formed by numerous successive slight modifications. But then there's this huge explosion called the Cambrian explosion, where DNA and a lot of the life forms of today sprang from the Cambrian explosion without any fossil record. So how can I explain this in my own words? So how can I, in my own words, explain this thing called the Cambrian explosion? Well, let me try. So for 4 billion years, life formed by numerous successive slight modification. This is the trunk of Darwin's tree, and springing from the trunk, branched out from Darwin's tree, some of the things that are considered the life of today. However, there's a tremendous amount of life, especially DNA and intelligence and all this stuff, exploded during the Cambrian period and developed into what we have today as far as intelligent beings, for instance, and animals and all this different phyla, if you will. So where did that all come from? That's what Darwin had a difficult time understanding. Even though he understood it, he could not accept it, and he just said that he had no answer. Now, this is not saying that there's no such thing as what Darwin said as far as forming numerous slight modifications. There's still modifications being done even today. That's called microevolution. But what we're talking about is macroevolution. He has no proof of the fossil record for this, what seems to be macroevolution. All of a sudden, all this stuff just appeared. Some neo-Darwinists that I've read have actually taken some of the fossil records from that 14 billion year time period and tried to extrapolate out to fill in the gap to the Cambrian explosion period. But that's, I think, is very unworthy of the actual data. Now, knowing something about the Cambrian explosion, we go back to the original statement that Charles Darwin made, his famous statement, which numerous successive slight modifications, then his theory would break down. And yet, in that same book, even after knowing something about the Cambrian explosion and the Cambrian system, he writes, to the question why we do not find rich fossiliferous deposits belonging to these assumed earliest periods prior to the Cambrian system, I can give no satisfactory answer. Now remember, in my physics class, I mentioned that the empirical scientists do not accept anything that goes beyond the testable evidence. They resort to the default, which is that we do not know yet, instead of admitting that they may be wrong in the original proposition. So in other words, he makes a proposition that if he can find anything that does not happen by numerous successive modifications, my theory would break down. He finds it in the Cambrian explosion, but then he just says, I can give no satisfactory answer. And instead of saying, oops, I made a mistake, I need to rethink this. So that's why Dr. Meyer came up and titled his book Darwin's Doubt, but he really didn't necessarily doubt it. He just questioned it, supposedly. I still believe it's somewhat of doubt. In his real deep thinking, but in truth, it was just a question that he had here. He could find no answer. So some people may ask, do I believe in evolution? And my answer is yes. I believe in microevolution, but not macroevolution. Now, some people might look at the butterfly and say, but John, isn't that macroevolution? You have a caterpillar crawling around in a tree and it goes through metamorphosis and all of a sudden comes out as a butterfly. And I say no, because that was all encoded in the DNA. The body shape and all the information before and after metamorphosis is in the DNA. So that is not an example of macroevolution. I think it's the beauty of creation, and then I think that's one of those things that we'll be talking about a little bit later when we talk about irreducible complexity. But no, I do not see that is any kind of macroevolution. Now, let me talk about probability, because I'm kind of a man of numbers, and we talked some about the sequencing of amino acids to form protein, and the probabilities associated with that are just astronomical. But now he mentions in this book, Darwin's Doubt, the complexity and specified complexity. So you have complexity, a bunch of numbers can be complex, and it has to be in that certain sequence to make some kind of form of a bunch of gibberish. But then to make actual something that makes sense, like time and tide wait for no man, to go from complexity to specified complexity, something that makes sense, the complexity adds to that probability. So it's not just the sequencing of those amino acids, but they actually mean something, that they're actually a code that represents a protein is very significant. and he goes into some of the complexity and the numbers of like 10 to the 44 times 10 to the 77. I won't give that all away because I want you to look at the video, because I don't need to reinvent the wheel. I'm not here. I'm here mainly as a resource to some of these things. I do add some own thinking every once in a while, but I don't want to take his thunder, and what he has to say is just awesome. I really want you to watch that video. As I end this class, I would like to highlight another additional reference material. This is a Darwin's Dilemma featuring Dr. Stephen Meyer also. And I've highlighted some of the areas that I particularly want you to focus on, and that's the Cambrian Explosion Part 1 and 2, and the 10 scientific problems with biological and chemical evolution. I find these are all very helpful, and I hope you enjoy them.
And now you know more of the story. Stay tuned. This is John McCamick with Truth University. Good day.